Hello, this is KYC News. We have provided you with relevant and reliable information for the day. First and foremost, we wish him good health and heartfelt desire. Here are the main points. Everyone is shocked by the confusion Stoltenberg caused. Putin says Russia is prepared. Everyone is shocked by the confusion Stoltenberg caused. The Secretary General of NATO's announcement that the emergency intervention units will have 30,000 more personnel than they do today appears to be nothing more than a dead letter on paper for the time being. The leaders of NATO member nations gathering in Madrid reportedly started to consider whether and how many of their personnel should enter those units in order to fill the figure of as many as 300,000, according to the Washington Post. A senior EU official, who, like others who commented on Stoltenberg's remarks, desired anonymity, remarked that it might be an unreasonable amount. Even more of them, according to the Washington Post, claimed that the stated plan for NATO forces shocked and surprised them, adding that they were not at all consulted about it. The entire team is now speculating on how many individuals will need to give an order to reach the absolutely astounding number of 300,000, as well as how they would divide them. However, when asked at a press conference in Madrid how he planned to reach that elusive number, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg responded that the majority would be stationed in their home nations and would be based on existing employees. According to him, this would imply that those soldiers would remain at home, but they would still need to be ready for an immediate redeployment in case of emergency. 200,000 in 30 days, 100,000 in 10 days. He said, of course, it goes without saying that member countries always contribute to NATO, and said he anticipated the goal to have 300,000 people in emergency response units in place by the end of the year. A NATO official, who also asked to remain anonymous, claimed that the number of 300,000 was still hypothetical and that the specifics of Stoltenberg's plan needed to be worked out with member nations. The official stated that the entire concept has not yet been worked out, and we will now have to build a model according to which we will be able to see what the national commitments would be. The declaration that the alliance will deploy brigades of roughly 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers in the 4 member countries that border Russia and are in the greatest risk is less publicized but may be more significant than the misunderstanding over the massively expanded numbers. Despite the fact that those figures fell far short of the most demanding demands made by Eastern Europe in the months preceding the summit, the architects of such a NATO policy claimed that it would considerably increase NATO's capacity to defend Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Putin says Russia is prepared. Putin said today that Russia is prepared to engage in a discussion on strategic stability and upholding the means of preventing the proliferation of WMDs. The Russian president said to attendees of the 10th Street Petersburg International Legal Forum, Russia is open to talks on safeguarding strategic stability, maintaining the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and improving the situation in the field of arms control. According to his assessment, the Kiev regime's conduct in Donbass can only be classified as crimes against humanity. The actions of the Kiev authorities can only be described as crimes against humanity, according to Putin. The United Kingdom declined. The notion of the United Kingdom joining the Macron-proposed European political community was denied by the British Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss. Truss refuted reports from the Élysée Palace that claimed British Prime Minister Boris Johnson expressed interest in the European political community during a conversation with the French president. Truss was speaking at a hearing in the Foreign Policy Committee of the lower house of the British Parliament. On June 26 in Germany, Johnson and Macron had a conversation outside of the Group of 7 Most Industrialized Nations summit. Macron advocated the creation of a political community open to all European nations that share a shared set of democratic ideals, whether or not they are currently members of the Union, desire to join it, or have already left it. Some commentators believe that Macron's proposal could provide a way for future British governments to re-establish deeper ties with the EU. Truss, however, stated that enhancing NATO and the G7's roles are top priority for the United Kingdom, according to Euractiv.com. I'm grateful. I declined the supply. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, stated that he turned down the offer to depart Kyiv by plane in an interview with the American television network NBC. A number of international authorities called me on the phone on the first day of the conflict. They advised me to leave and flee, and several of them, speaking sincerely and directly, told me that they were only trying to help and that they could provide me with anything I needed, including cars, helicopters, planes, or other resources, Zelensky stated. I declined them. I informed them that I did not require any vehicles, that we required firearms, and that I would remain in Kyiv, explained Zelensky. He also recalled the first seconds after discovering the Russian attack had started. I was only considering us, my people. Ukraine sprang to mind. I headed straight to my office because, for lack of a better term, I was prepared. I started thinking right away. We quickly came together, created a military committee, and prepared ourselves. Making a decision is the most important responsibility. Planning for tomorrow or the day after tomorrow is not necessary, the president of Ukraine noted. The UK PM says that China must uphold its agreements to Hong Kong. When Hong Kong was returned to China 25 years ago, Prime Minister Boris Johnson promised that Britain would do everything in its power to hold Beijing accountable for its promises about democratic rights. Johnson claimed that China had broken its promise to uphold the one country, two systems agreement made as part of the 1997 agreement ending British colonial control. A national security law passed in 2020 as well as electoral amendments that, in Britain's opinion, weaken Hong Kong's freedoms and autonomy have drawn particular criticism. Johnson said in a video message that we simply cannot avoid the fact that, for some time now, Beijing has been failing to comply with its commitments on the 25th anniversary of the handover. It's a situation that jeopardizes both Hong Kong residents' rights and freedoms and the country's ongoing development and prosperity. In order to commemorate the occasion, Chinese President Xi Jinping is making his first travel outside of the Chinese mainland in more than 2 years. Chinese officials have in the past rejected British criticism, claiming that it should not interfere in Hong Kong's internal affairs and that it still harbors a colonial attitude despite the handover. The Chinese Foreign Ministry responded to Johnson's remarks by accusing the UK of maintaining a colonial mindset despite the handover and abusing human rights as an excuse to defame Hong Kong. No outside force has the authority to intervene since Hong Kong is Chinese territory. The so-called pledges do not exist at all, and the United Kingdom has no claim to sovereignty, governance, or oversight over Hong Kong after handover. During a routine news briefing, Zhao Lijian, a spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry, said. In response to the National Security Statute, the United Kingdom established an immigration path for those having British national, overseas, passports last year. According to Johnson, 120,000 Hong Kong residents applied under the program. Hong Kong is a goal we still have. We made a commitment to the territory and its residents 25 years ago, and we intend to uphold that promise, Johnson said. To ensure that Hong Kong is once again administered by and for the people of Hong Kong, he continued, Britain would do all we can to hold China to its commitments. The Reuters. Less safe than the Assad regime pretends, Damascus. Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, has made an effort to depict Damascus as a refuge of peace in a country torn by violence ever since his army retook the predominantly agricultural province around Damascus in 2018 after losing it. Securing Damascus and the surrounding area known as rural Damascus is crucial for the government's political rehabilitation and economic recovery, in addition to the city's symbolic significance. Some governments quickly came around to accepting Assad's story. Sweden and Denmark decided that Damascus is safe enough for Syrian refugees to return home based on the relative lack of anti-Assad activity. But now, this overly simplistic risk assessment is being put to the test. Since April, there have been 16 attacks in and around Damascus, resulting in the deaths of 13 government-affiliated individuals. Although the perpetrators of the attacks remain unknown, the frequency, more than one per week, raises concerns about the security of government-controlled areas. 6 attempted murders were reported in April, according to local media. One incident was recorded in the city of Damascus, while the others happened in places like Katana, Al-Kiswa, Baitjin, and the Al-Warid region that are outside of the capital. There were 2 reported deaths. May saw a similar number of attacks, with 6 confirmed fatalities. Once more, the majority of these strikes took place in towns outside of Damascus, including Beit Sam, Hajara, and Kfar Yabuz. Then in June, there were 4 attacks in Hosh Nashri, Baitjin, Kedsaya, and Spena that resulted in the deaths of 5 persons, 3 of whom perished while dismantling IEDs. Notably, pro-government media chose to downplay the rise in violence rather than covering every event. Even when some of these assaults were made public, news organizations that were supported by the government frequently presented the victims as civilians. On the other side, independent news sources said that the majority of the casualties were government fighters or combatants rather than civilians. According to an analysis of these sources, 11 of the 13 people slain since April were members of the local security and armed forces, and 2 were foreign militiamen supported by Iran, one from the Afghan Fatimiyan and the other from the Lebanese Hezbollah. The perpetrators of these attacks have typically kept silent despite the gravity of their actions. Only one group, Islamic State, ISIS, has thus far taken responsibility for any acts of violence, specifically the 2 attacks that took place in Deir Kabia, south of Damascus, in May. Regarding the others, the methods used to carry them out provide hints to the perpetrators. For instance, some media outlets stated that 4 of the casualties were discovered days after they vanished, indicating that they were initially kidnapped. In Syria, kidnapping for ransom has become a common occurrence, therefore criminal organizations may be to blame for some cases. If this is the case, the killings may have occurred because the attacks failed or because the perpetrators intended to hide their traces. IEDs were used in 6 of the unclaimed attacks, while guns were used in the remaining incidents. Given that all of the victims were Assad regime supporters or members, it is likely that some of these acts were carried out by former rebels who have the motivation, means, and resources to carry out assaults. In addition to breaking promises made during surrender negotiations in 2018, such as the release of prisoners, the government has stepped up its efforts to compel young men from the countryside around Damascus to serve in the military. More importantly, after nearly 2 years of relative calm, increased resistance may have been prompted by worsening living conditions and rising rates of hunger. Certain attacks, particularly the 4 that involved gunfire, could have been inside jobs. It is completely feasible. The dramatic reduction in fighting in Syria has intensified the struggle for power and resources among pro-government organizations. Others may have chosen to utilize more covert tactics of settling scores, even though some of these situations have been resolved through direct confrontations between the persons involved. However, the most crucial aspect of these attacks is not who carried them out. The main question is whether the government can stop them from attacking once more. The random nature of these episodes, their dispersion over a vast area, and the multiplicity of probable suspects make it a daunting problem even though the answer is yet unknown. Even if the government is able to stop this killing spree, recent events have revealed that the protection of places that are ostensibly safe is actually flimsy and precarious. Assad's assertion that the Syrian capital is a secure location for refugees from the nation or anyone else should not be taken at face value by Western nations. Syria is still at war, and a comprehensive and equitable political settlement is the only way to achieve long-lasting peace.